The following interview will be hard to digest. You're going to get a peek in someone's life and their hardship from when they were young, and you'll understand and see how they transformed and conquered. So before this starts, I would like to offer a warning. Some of the topics and things that are going to be said will be somewhat disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. And this is Real Talk, no filter.
Thank you. It's good to be here, David. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. So I'm Jillie Maria. I'm a transformational catalyst. I own Fire and Ice Transformational Coaching, where I help women to transform emotion and trauma into, as you like to say, the golden nuggets, into life-changing experiences. I believe that when we, in my own personal experience, when we let go of the emotion, the energy and motion from our stories, and we process it, it collapses the stories. And when we collapse the victim stories, it allows us to move to a different space in our lives. And most of us don't even realize we're in those spaces. And as you said, when you first were talking about the our pre-interview, the trifecta of things that led to my sort of collapsing on myself, if you will, were family things that were happening, and the collapse of a potential relationship, and a former friend kicking me in the butt and holding me accountable and saying, you need to find a therapist. Mm-hmm. Let me know when your appointment is. Now, most people will say to somebody, hey, something's not right, but they won't necessarily, they might talk amongst their friends, but they're expecting someone else to take the leap of faith to share that with the person and say, hey, so-and-so. And this person jumped out and basically said, you need to do this thing. And I was already in a space of receptivity about that and knowing something was wrong. And it went back to about probably a year prior or so. And I was with relatives, and one of my relatives said to me, are you happy? And I, of course, as so many of us do, sure, yeah, of course. And I thought about my answer, getting on the plane, flying back to North Carolina. I thought about my answer, like it kept coming up for me. And I find that when things come up for us repeatedly, when they keep scratching our brain, as I like to call it, or the same message keeps showing up among different people, when there's no prompting whatsoever, that person doesn't know me from Adam, and they're saying, are you happy? Are you okay? And we keep being back to that space of, but you're not happy. Mm-hmm. But you're not happy. And I finally remember I remember distinctly calling a therapist, leaving a message back in the days of answering machines. This was 2011, and her calling me back and scheduling the appointment almost immediately. And I didn't know much about therapy because I grew up with parents and grandparents, as most of us have in our people in their 30s and 40s, where therapy was not something we talked about. We sweep emotions, we sweep experiences, we sweep anything less than love and joy and happy hands underneath the rug. We'll deal with that later. Except that creates resentment and anger and rage. And it's honestly, if we're not dealing with those emotions, they make us controllable. Mm-hmm. Because power's bigger than us, including our government, including outside forces, including friends, quote unquote, who want to stay in victimhood with us, will invariably grab onto that anger, those emotions, like they are, the horn on a bull, so to speak, and use it. You have a right to be angry. You should be this. You should be outraged. We look for righteous anger and outrage, mm-hmm. but we don't know how to bleed through it. And so when I found this therapist, the short version of it was I went through a year and a half of being mirrored and questioned pretty much every week. And I deconstructed every single one of my relationships, all of them. So my parents, siblings, all of it, my work relationships, everything that I had, and patterns of behavior that we don't even think about why we're, where are we getting expectations from? How often do people in your audience have expectations they haven't shared? And then when the person doesn't show up, they have the story because, and we never asked, by the way, we didn't ask for help. No one ever shows up to help me. We Eeyore it, right? We're like, we'll sit there and we'll say, I have to do things on my own, which is a trauma response, by the way. Well, nobody shows up for me, but we didn't ask, but we're terrified of asking because we're scared we're going to get hurt, or we're scared people are going to be busy, or we don't even know what we need. So I went through this space of, okay, you're going to have to be brave enough to ask. And I remember my therapist at one point saying to me, so you're going to ask a certain person for a certain thing. The chances that that person is going to say no are very high. So I want you to notice when you ask the person, and I do this with my clients now too as a coach, I want you to notice how you feel in the ask. Because it's really important that we get present to the space of, gosh, I'm terrified of asking my mom, dad, best friend, husband, spouse, partner for my boss. I'm terrified of asking my boss for a raise. I'm terrified of saying, even like something controversial here in 2021, I'm terrified of exposing my medical stuff to someone and saying, I don't want to get the jab. Mm-hmm. Or I'm terrified of being, like one of my friends recently said to me, she's like, I've known for years that I'm Black incorrectly. And I kind of went, and I've seen it a little bit like among people who are super liberal as Black people, and then people that are more conservative as Black people and being Black incorrectly. But I was curious as to what her experience about that was. So I got brave and I asked, and I said, and she said, well, when I bring up certain topics and talk about how, because she's a small business owner herself. And she said, I talk about things like personal responsibility. And I talk about things like going to therapy. And I talk about things like eschewing private family business, which is code for there's shame in that. And we don't look at our shame and our crap. And we certainly don't tell other people about it. So we don't heal it because we're not resourced. So we don't talk about it. And so she and I ended up having this conversation. It was very eye-opening for me because I always find, I always find different perspectives fascinating. Even when I vehemently disagree with somebody, to be able to say, so I'm curious as to how you got there, to suspend, to realize in my own space, right, that I'm like, oh God, I disagree with that person. I'm being triggered. Okay, stop a second, breathe. What about it? Like, let's get specific. Is it that someone told me a thing and that person, I really value their opinion, and what if they're wrong? Or is it I made a decision and I now realize I was following the crowd? Or I did something that I realized now was out of alignment and I don't know if I can change it. We all make those mistakes. We all do things that we do from a place of, I only knew what I knew in that moment, because we can't know more. Mm-hmm. We can't judge who we are in 2021 by who we are in 2000, Y2K, in 2005, in 2010, because that's a completely different person. And if we're in the space of judging, well, how dare you have done that in, 1712? Okay, but we were in a completely different consciousness then. Mm-hmm. And it's not making excuses for it or making it right. It's just saying, you only know here in 2021, in August of 2021, what you know. What you're going to know in August of 2022 is probably going to be a huge amount of very different information. So you're going to make totally different choices. Mm-hmm. So you might get married, you might get divorced, you might have a baby, you might lose a baby, you might, lose a job, become an entrepreneur. You might get in a car accident. You might, buy a brand new car. You might discover this whole other world of things that you never knew anything about because you never needed to know. And when we're in that space of, I didn't know what I didn't know. And like when I came into, in furtherance, like when I started, I've, told the story before, but, I buried my rate. It happened in October of 2002. And I was actually and I was having nightmares for years, didn't understand why, or didn't have any understanding why I just would have these really vicious nightmares with spiders, and it was creepy. And one of my friends posted a Zumba party, and she was giving part of the proceeds to a local rape crisis organization. And I see this pamphlet. I take the pamphlet because I'm thinking, I want to volunteer. I want to give back. And I had this like connection that I didn't understand. Looking back on it, it was definitely an intuitive connection. It was definitely an aha moment. And I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're like, I've had those before, I want to encourage you to follow those, whether it's for something that you need to personally deal with and heal, or whether it's just, I'm feeling called to serve in this manner. Those are really important. To follow our intuition is really important. And even the more that we go into this bizarre time that we're living through, the more that our intuition is very powerful. And it doesn't mean we have to shout from the top of the Empire State Building with a megaphone. It just means we quietly, I'm feeling a want, desire, need to go in this direction, and we go in that direction. And then here's another little piece for you all. You don't owe anybody an explanation of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You do not. We have this notion in society that we have to justify our choices, our emotions, our, provide whatever we're, called to do in life. And I want to tell you that that's not necessary. We have this notion that, especially now, that we owe people this and that and the other thing. You don't. We simply do not. And I think it goes back to that notion, especially with emotion when we were younger, of if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Most of us know exactly a time in life when we were crying, we were upset, and it might not even have been your emotion. If you're an empath, it probably wasn't even your emotion. And someone above you didn't know, and what I mean by above you, as a parent or grandparent or guardian, didn't know how to deal with their own emotion, or didn't know how to comfort you. Holding space was. So they had Jesus and they had their rosary and they had their Bible, but aside from that, they were freaking clueless. We don't want to fault people for that. We just want to realize in 2021 that when you feel emotion, it's just energy and motion. Your survival record to this moment physically is 100%. So to slow things down, emotion is just energy and motion. Joy, love-based emotions are there that we can celebrate love. We can celebrate bliss, compassion, grace, all those things. When people say negative emotion, what's negative about it? Fear-based emotions for me, anger, sadness, guilt, grief, shame, are simply, hey, Jillie, you're out of alignment somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Something is trying to come up in your space that needs to be felt and dealt with, because usually there's a story attached to our emotion. And sometimes, and I want to share this little nugget with you, 90% of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are not ours. The first time someone ever told that to me, I was jaw drop. Wait, what? How is that? What? Because we're taught that, you're responsible for your emotions, your thoughts, but I didn't know what an empath was until a couple of years ago. And a lot of things, when I realized what an empath was, being an empath and absorbing other people's emotions, thoughts, physical symptoms, there's like 8 different types of being empaths. That could probably be its own podcast, but when we stop and think about the notion of like, you feel fine, then you suddenly walk into a room and you feel cranky. Chances are high that's not your emotion. That's not yours. You're in a space, and I know one of my friends will say, every time I talk to my mom, I'm like, my mom is so angsty. And when I talk to my mom, I'm like, it's not yours. People, energy vampire, let me just take your positive energy, David, and let me give you my crap.
Yeah.
They're not doing it consciously, but they're in a space of like, if we're an open empath, oh, you're open to receive my crap. Good, great, I can give it away. So there's that energy exchange. So digressing back to when I started healing my rape and being in the space like the first, and I want to say, I'm one of those people that normally somebody knows where I am pretty much 24/7. When I went to the Rape Crisis Center, I had told not a soul. And when I remember the first time I told my story to the counselor, and I remember sitting in this room, and it was a gorgeous blue sky, gorgeous sunny day outside. And I'm sitting in this chair with the window behind me, and I keep doing this. And I'm sobbing, and I'm telling the whole story. And then I get done telling the whole story, and I'm still like with my Kleenexes, and I'm looking out the window. And she finally says, "What are you looking for?" And I swear to God, I'm waiting for a lightning bolt to strike me dead. Because I was that sure that in telling my truth and sharing my secrets, that I was going to be struck clear off this earth. And she said, what if that's not the case? What if that's not what's going to happen? Clearly didn't happen. But we have these notions around sharing our secrets, around sharing this information. And I want to share with you that I went through about 1.5 years of really intense trauma coaching and counseling. And I healed most of it. I healed a good portion of it. I felt like I was in a good space. I've published articles identifying myself as a rape survivor thriver. I've had every arrow you can imagine thrown at me. And then things that you probably would say, wait, what? Someone said that to you? We get bold behind keyboards.
Yep.
We are very, and I always say to people, one of my checks with things when I get, and I mean, I'm not going to lie to you and say that I don't get hot on topics. There are certain topics that I am like, oh, right. But I also think to myself, if I was talking to whoever in person, would I say that to their face? Or would I say, that's interesting. Taking a deep breath, tell me more about your perspective. Tell me more about your why. Tell me more about how you came to that place. And how much grace would we be in right now as a society? Where would we be if we stopped lobbing bombs at people and throwing labels at people and making us versus them and saying, hey, I'm just curious as to why you're thinking, where you got to that place. I'm curious as to what your evidence is and where I could maybe read more up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're able to be in a space of grace with people and realize that, hey, maybe they're terrified of, talking about the thing, their trauma, their issue. One of my friends didn't even know, most people didn't even know. I mean, there's people that are going to watch this and are going to be like, wait, what? I've been mugged twice in my life. And nothing happened either time. I was really young and stupid. And in both cases, and in one case told the person if they were going to kill me to turn around so I could see their face before they killed me. And they ran off. 10 out of 10 don't recommend doing that. I was really young and really dumb and didn't tell anybody about it till like way after the fact, till I saw the dude in the mall and was like shaking like a leaf, and the people around me, what in the world? What's going on? I'm looking like and he got arrested. But here's the thing is, we're in this space of, what if we were in a space of different understanding? What if we slowed everything down and allowed ourselves to be in a space of, I'm curious as to what that person's story is. And I tell people, if you know my story and you know where I stand on certain things, assume that everybody that you know is me. Because one of the things that I've encountered with many a client in the last year is I can't wear a mask for more than maybe 10 minutes tops before I am having, and I wouldn't say a meltdown in the sense of like sobbing, crying, that sort of thing. I just can't breathe. So I'm having anxiety attacks, I'm having panic attacks, but I know how to sit gracefully and ground myself and handle it. Pull the mask off my face, get to the space of where I need to be to regain my footing and move on with life. But I look at things like that and I say to people, if someone is, just because someone is wearing a mask, maybe they're in a space, and I had a client say this to me, who is has been through a lot of stuff that even I wouldn't want to try and imagine. And she said it came down to the red dot theory. And the red dot theory among rape survivors, sexual abuse survivors, is this notion that everybody can see my trauma. Like I have a red dot on my forehead and everybody can see my trauma. And she said it came down to, for me, being in the space of, did I want to be not wearing a mask and able to breathe, but feeling like everybody can see through me and see my trauma and I feel super exposed and vulnerable? Or do I put a mask on and have some feeling of safety from, not even from a virus so much as just feeling like I'm physically safer in my body and no one's looking at me and I'm not as vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I said, I see that and I feel that, and I hold space for you to do what you need to do for you. And I would say that about anybody watching this podcast. I'm holding space for you to do what you need to do for your best and highest good. Because you always get on a plane, right? And the first thing they do is tell you to put your oxygen mask on first.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're doing that metaphorically, and that means not putting a mask on our face because it's detrimental to us and we like spiral super fast, then that is our choice. And, you know, when I start, and I will tell you, one of the things that happened at the very start of this whole mess, you know, I was in the same space where I was like, okay, it's 2 weeks, I can wear a mask. I didn't really understand it. The more I researched, the more I was like, the science isn't really quite working for me with like micron size versus masks. And, you know, and how cloth works. You know, most clothing is meant to be worn on our body to keep it from being naked. That is literally its job. It's not meant to be a breathing screen. It's not meant to be a viral screen. But at the same time, right, I very quickly realized that I was having flashbacks and that I still had healing work to do. And I would see my rapist's hand on I would feel my rapist's hand on my face. And I would be in a space of like, and imagine you're walking through Target and you're looking at me and I don't have a mask on my face and I'm holding on to the cart. And for a long time, I would be getting 2 or 3 things and I still would grab a cart because I needed something to hold on to in case I felt my stuff starting to fall.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that space of, and people were like, why didn't you just do like, you know, pick up and you can just curbside? Because I needed to I also realized I was tactile. So in that space of like having flashbacks as I'm walking through a Target and everybody can just see me being a human being walking through the Target, right? But you don't know what someone is going through behind their eyes, behind that mask, behind those sunglasses. We don't know what someone is going through with their experiences. And so being in all of that space and going, okay, I still have things to heal. And I want to say to anybody that's watching this, that's a trauma survivor that has done months, years, days worth of work, that has started their healing journey. I want to say to you, one, that I applaud your courage. Because it takes a lot of courage to dig into your stuff and start getting real with yourself, and calling yourself on your own crap takes a lot of courage. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't have to live like this. Maybe I can heal this. Takes a crap ton of courage. But I also want to tell you, please don't beat yourself up if you are, because trauma is a layer cake, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're in a space of like, we've healed all these layers, but then as we're having to wear masks, as we're in a space of situational awareness where we realize that if something bad were to happen and I had to identify a suspect, quote unquote, well, he was wearing a mask and he had glasses on and he had a ball cap on. So I can't see facial hair. I can't see dimples. I can't see, you know, depending upon if the person's wearing a gaiter, I may not, you know, there's a lot of facial features I can't see. I can't tell what eye color they have. I might not be able to tell hair color. I might have skin color, which we're not allowed to talk about in 2021. Or I might have, well, he's a man. I think he was white or Hispanic. He looked like he was about 5'10". He was wearing a ball cap, a mask, and reflective sunglasses. They might have been Ray-Bans. You reduce dramatically what you can talk about. Identification gets reduced dramatically. And that is a huge trigger for a lot of people who are in a space of like trying to capture details if they should need them. Trauma survivors do that subconsciously. We have a habit once we learn to look people in the eye. Hey, David, how are you? We're making eye contact. I see you, you see me. Like when I run a mile a day, when I'm out running, like seeing people just either like waving at you, looking you in the eye, somehow letting you know, like I see you and you see me, and there's a mutual respect there. And I'm safe to be around. Cool. So, you know, to be in, and then allowing me to fast forward into the space of, you know, finding the healing arts, finding the Akashic records. A lot of people ask me how I came into that. The Akashic records being a record of every thought, word, and deed of your soul since its inception. And I stumbled into a healing group, a spiritual group, and there was someone doing a live, and she said, if you have a question for the Akashic records, drop it in the comments. And I had a question, didn't know this woman from Adam, she nailed it. And I, again, with the, wait, what? So I was fascinated. And I kept trying to find, you know, free lives. I didn't really know. So I started studying what the Akashic records were, became certified, and then became certified in multiple other modalities. But it also, everything along the way, helped me dig deeper into my stuff and heal my emotion and get into the space of, hey, if I allow myself to feel my anger, my rage, my sadness, to a point now in 2021 where I'm not only, there's a space between reaction and response. We don't call them first reactors, we call them first responders. Mm-hmm. Because they're in clear mind and body to come to us and respond to an emergency. If we're coming from a place of reaction, we're coming from a place of anger, fear. So we're trying to defend our position. Well, I think this about who or whatever, and we're trying desperately to hold our position as opposed to being in a space of, hey, I have some unhealed crap here and I'm willing to understand why you believe what you believe. Again, I get to be in a space of, tell me more about why you think that. Tell me, and that's one of the things I like to share on podcasts is giving people you know, as you said earlier, a golden nugget, to be in a space of like, what if you, instead of being in a space of rah, 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 going, gosh, I realize I'm super defensive about my position on given subject, but this person differs greatly from me. And I'm just curious as to why you feel that way. What is in your past that has you clinging to this desperately? What is in my past that might have me clinging to a belief, an ideal, a particular politician, a stance on something desperately?
That's interesting. Very, very interesting. I love it. I love it.
So I saw you writing. I saw you taking notes.
Yeah, I have my notes for you. Don't worry. Like she mentioned, there's a lot of golden nuggets in this. First thing I would like to say is, one, I'm truly sorry that you've gone through all that experience. But again, I look at you, and we've talked prior to all this, is that I look at a strong woman that you chose to, when that situation happened, you chose to not really play victim in a sense, but you kind of said, and now what? Like, what now? And then from that, you took it upon yourself to accept what happened, despite it happened. So there's the only thing you do is really accept it, but then choose to change your trauma into a transcending format of yourself to make yourself bigger, greater, and then bring awareness around it, i.e. your coaching, which is fantastic. I look at all this stuff, and you also mentioned you have to look within yourself to overcome. And that's one thing which is very true. Your intuition is something that I believe that a lot of us, we forget about. And the only time we actually use it is if, one, we fear something. So if we're in that fear, or if you are in danger, you're saying your first thing is like, my intuition says I need to run. However, your intuition does not have to be just fear. Your intuition is not always about danger. Your intuition can simply say, hey, if I want to pick, for example, lottery numbers or something that's good for you, and you're saying, oh, maybe I should pick up apples over oranges, your intuition says, guess what? You should pick up the apples. There's a reason why you have an intuition, and that's because it's more spiritual sense. You mentioned that emotion is energy in motion, which is, you're absolutely right on that one. But when I go down to the intuition, your intuition again tells you, saying, hey, listen to your, like saying, hey, guess what? I know what's better for you than what you're really craving for and what you're looking for and what you're going after. So that's something that I believe that we should be looking at and looking towards more of, and be working on how to get more closer into our intuition over our, and practice that true thing, which is mind over matter.
Well,
And
I think too, I think an important point too is that, you were talking about using it for good. And I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was working on a project and I was pushing, and we often like push ourselves and we're like, everything is going wrong and we push. And our natural, I could just get this finished, right? And my laptop and my phone both were being buggy. And so I reset my laptop, and it still was being buggy. And I couldn't, my phone was frustrating me, and I couldn't get to what I needed to come up. And I finally took a breath, and I got this notion: you need an iced coffee. And I was in the space of like, not now, like I'm like, having, someone around you, like, I want to go, and not now. And I kept, not now. And then I finally had this, like, after rebooting my computer for the third time, and it still was not doing what I needed it to do. And I finally just, fine. We all have those human moments of frustration. Fine. So I grab my pocketbook, grab my phone, go drive and get an iced coffee. As I'm coming home, I'm at the stoplight, and I see this gorgeous, vivid rainbow. Mm-hmm. And it had rained in the area, like in the area between the Dunkin' Donuts and my house. And I see this gorgeous rainbow, and I'm like, thank you. So sometimes it's a matter of, if I had not gone outside, if I had not gone to get a coffee, I wouldn't have seen that. And sometimes we're in a space, like I've had times when I'm like, I'm really not really feeling a coffee, but okay. And I was in the same Dunkin' Donuts about, well, it's now 2021. So probably summer of 2019. And again, really wasn't feeling a coffee, but fine, I'll go. And I go, and this gentleman, while I'm in there, has a seizure. And I happen to know from watching people have seizures at Spartan races what to do. So I run over, like abandon my stuff. I run over, and I'm like, I'm screaming like, someone call 911. And this person's having a seizure. And the guy that's sitting next to him is like, what do I do? And I'm telling him what to do, and so on and so forth. And get the guy situated. The guy comes out of the seizure, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, just take a breath. And he's got drool going on, and, looks like he's all of a sudden mortified the whole bit. And I'm like, listen, you're okay. You're safe. And he's like, what happened? And he's looking at me, and he's like, and I said, do you know your name? So he tells me his name, and I said, do you know what day it is? And it takes a second, tells me what day it is. I said, do you know where you are? He said, I'm in a Dunkin' Donuts. I said, okay. He's like, what happened? I said, you had a seizure and you fell out of your chair. And the guy standing behind me that was sitting next to him said, I'm really glad that you were here, because I wouldn't have known what to do. Mm-hmm. And he probably would have hurt himself much more. So sometimes we're in the space of, we don't know why. If you're in a space where like you're feeling led or you're feeling called and you don't really understand why, I want to encourage you to follow it. And again, when we're in the space of being afraid of what are people going to think if they know, don't worry about it. Because here's the thing that's important to realize is nobody can see your stuff. And unless you start telling people, no one's going to know. I was in therapy for 3 months before I shared it with my family. I started going to rape crisis counseling and was in it for, I think, it was a few months that I was in it before I finally said, I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. And the thing is we got to get comfortable. We got to be okay with it for ourselves. When we're looking for someone else and we're sharing it with the whole world, a lot of times we're looking for external validation. If you're looking for external, and I want to say this about anything, relationships, job stuff, whatever it is, check your energy. Are you looking for validation? Are you trying to say like, I'm Facebook happy, I'm social media happy, and you're miserably behind the scenes?
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for validation, I want to invite you not to be in a space of beating yourself up, but being in a space of, I'm leading, let curiosity, let love lead. I'm curious as to why I feel this way. I'm curious as to why I'm doing this. And just see what comes up with, again, without criticizing. We're just being in a space of, because criticizing, we're being in a space of curiosity, because criticism and judgment are ways people try to control us and the way we try to control other people.
Very true. Very, very true. And I love what you're saying, because in all honesty, when I look at to be honest, the name of the podcast, which is Real Talk, No Filter, that's exactly what it is. I am looking for people out there that are willing to talk and share experience, and looking at, to be honest with you, the people that hide, like you mentioned, hide behind the keyboard. Come on my show, to be honest with you, because that's where I want to see that, okay, let me understand your perspective of things.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest key of things. It's not, yes, you mentioned that you are a rape survivor. That right there is the unfiltered part, because like you mentioned, a lot of people out there are traumatized, they are triggered, and they have gone through a lot of things. It's that, come on my show, let me share your story, because there might be someone out there that is behind the filter, that's not willing to come out and bring out. And I'm not saying, hey, come to my show and tell me your story. It's more of a, hey, come on my show, listen to what's happening, and listen to other people that are out there like yourself. Get the help that you need. Therefore, you become unfiltered towards people around you. Therefore, you could be unfiltered to the emotions, the intuition, the cosmos, the energies around you. Therefore, you're able to actually bring that energy within yourself. And that's the biggest thing. And I want to touch base on one thing I would love to comment on. You mentioned, I wrote down here, your sunny day experience when you looked outside to your right, and then you saw, you kept on looking at on your counseling, I believe. And you noticed that sunny day, and you're like, hey, I wish there was a lightning bolt that come and strike me right now. I looked at that completely different. I thought you're actually going to say, guess what? I looked outside, I saw a nice sunny day, and I realized, guess what? It's a new day. It's a new beginning for me. I could see the positive of things, right? And that's where my mindset was going. I'm like, okay, I almost like, I'm like, yeah, I think she's going to say this, but I'm just like, no, totally opposite. And I'm just like, I mentioned this prior to one of my guests, and something that I've been playing along with this idea as well, is that we as humans, we always look at things, the negative first, then the positive.
Oh, absolutely.
And I believe that if we change our mindset to look at things positive first, and then evaluate the situation, understand the situation, then after that, once you do all that stuff and you analyze it and you say, guess what, make that decision if it's good or bad. Because then you look at, there's that word fear, and I've mentioned this as well, is that fear is two things. It's either A, forget everything and run, or you forgot the other one, it's something but and rise.
Face everything and rise.
Yes. And it's sad to say, I've been like, I really need to like put it on like my board up here, because, and it's sad to say this, like my last like 4 podcasts I did, I keep screwing that up. I'm going to write a note, therefore it's good up there. But yes, you look at two things, and that's how you evaluate situations. It's either A, face everything and rise, or you forget everything and run. And that two things is different, because one, you're running away from situation versus standing up, being strong and facing your situation. And that right there is the mindset of truly being a human being. Is A, taking in the things that are around you, surrounding you, making it into a positive, or taking things around you, surrounding you, and running away from those situations. Last thing I would like to touch base on is Fire and Ice. Tell me about it.
So,
and how did you come up with the name?
The notion behind Fire and Ice is the element of fire melts ice. And a lot of times when we are in a space of, I was frozen. I was frozen for 11 years before I came into a space of, of we're going to deal with this. It's time. It's time to unravel this. It's time to get real. It's time to let myself out of the cage. And I didn't even realize I was in a cage. But we so often, we suppress or we repress because we don't know, we don't know. And most of us don't know, like when we don't know about SANE nurses and rape kits and reporting. And I've had a number of people tell me stories and then they'll be like, oh my God, I was raped. Like they'll have this notion of going, and I'll say, well, did you consent? I'm not asking if they consented to like slap them or beat them up, just saying, well, the trigger point there is the key of that whole situation is, were you consenting? And, a lot of times they'll be, oh my God. And I'm saying, okay, so your body registered that as a trauma. We're not judging it. We're just going, oh, my body registered that as a trauma. So I need to go back and pull the emotion out of it, get the energy in motion out of it, get the anger, the resentment, the sadness, the grief, the guilt, the shame, the whatever else is in there out of it, so that I can collapse the story. And here's the thing, we have to allow ourselves when something first happens to be in the victim space. Yes, something did happen to you. Yes, I was raped. Yes, seeing somebody when I was in group coaching for my rape, there was a young woman who had been raped not even 24 hours before. She was sitting 2 chairs down from me. So she was still in the immediate aftermath of like, I can't believe this is happening. They had just like picked her up from the hospital. An advocate had picked her up from the hospital, and the Raleigh police brought her to the rape crisis center. And she was still in a space of like, oh my God. And I want to say, we have to allow ourselves to be in the space of victimhood. That doesn't mean that we build a house there on 20 acres and hang out there for the rest of our lives. There's nothing glamorous or sexy about being a victim. Not at all. But being in the space of like, okay, so victimhood essentially becomes a trampoline as opposed to a hammock. And when we're in a space of, she was in the space of like, she was fighting it actively and like watching somebody else actively, like this didn't happen to me. Like she was so watching someone be in the space of like, I'm fine. I don't need counseling. And this like, whoa. And then like 6 weeks later, her telling her story, she finally got to the space of telling her story. And every one of us was looking at her like, oh my God. And to be in that space of letting, and like, she finally got to the space of like, quiet. And being in the space where we accept that it happened and we're no longer, because here's the thing, a lot of times people move physically. I'm going to move to a new part of the country. Fantastic. You're taking you with you. I'm going to move to a new city 30 miles away where no one knows my story and what happened to me, and no one's going to look at me weird, and I can lie and tell whatever story I want. Fabulous. You still take you with you. And until you're willing to heal those wounds, and because here's the thing, when you heal those wounds, you let go of the anger, you let go of the sadness, you feel it and let go of it, you can't be triggered anymore. So someone can say something, and like there's people that, I'll hear like every time there's a public rape, right? Every single time like there's a Brock Turner or whoever emerges in the world and like they're throwing accusations and whatnot and so on and so forth. First I want to consume every detail, not because it's my business, but because I'm in this, someone says, what do you think? Because invariably somebody reaches out and says, what do you think? Where should I be on this? I'm like, well, number one, why do you have to have a position on it? You're not required to. I'm like, I do it because I need to be in a space the way my brain works right now. And sometimes there's literally like, this is the person, this is what they suspect happened. There's no info. Okay. But I don't want to be in that space of piling on one way or the other. And, we get to a space of, people, and I'll say, well, as a rape survivor, blah, 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 blah. And people will say, well, why do you need to engage in the conversation? And I'm like, you know what? Because I give a real life voice to it. I'm going to ask you questions. If you're slamming on somebody, if you're being ugly to somebody, if you're being a keyboard warrior because you're super uncomfortable with this topic. And I'm like, rapists cause rape. People who don't understand, and one of the things I think needs to be said, that's a really hard truth for some people, is rape is not a sex crime.
Mm-hmm.
Rape is a power crime. It involves sex. But we far too often shove it under the rug because we're all really uncomfortable talking about emotion in the first place. We're all uncomfortable talking, well, I would never want to imagine. And I look at things and I say, statistically, when you look at the number of rapes and sexual assaults we're aware of, according to RAINN, and if you look at the FBI Bureau of Statistics and whatnot, most people are raped by someone that they know. It's not a bridge dweller thing. It's not the guy you're walking out of the club and some guy grabs you in an alley, blah, blah, blah. Statistically speaking, more than 90% of rapes and sexual assaults are committed by people known to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a really difficult, painful, icky truth that a lot of people really can't wrap their heads around. When you look at especially if you look at the military, and again, I'm not trying to bash the military, but I'm just saying, what we know statistically, what we know from information recorded, the men who are raping people are somebody's brother, somebody's husband, somebody's grandfather, somebody's husband, somebody's boyfriend, somebody's fiance. Statistically speaking, there's no way around that. And we have to come out of this notion of like othering people and be in the space of personal responsibility. Because we oftentimes try to be like, well, if people could just be, more modest, and if everybody could just wear a burqa, then rape wouldn't happen. No. As a woman, if I wear a bikini to the pool because it's 90 degrees outside right now, that doesn't give you entitlement to crap. I can't stop you when I'm running. When I ran this morning and I'm wearing booty shorts, I can't stop you from looking at my booty. And frankly, I don't care if you're staring at it because it's not yours, it's mine. But the point of fact is we so often get into the space of one of the most common questions that I get from people. I'm in both genders, so it's not just men, it's women too, because women raise men, right? Well, what were you wearing? Well, what were you doing? Well, what? And we try to find this space of like, we can't lay personal responsibility for a rape on the rapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit there saying to people, and I tell, I go through all the details, and people will sit there, well, if you had been, and I've heard literally everything. Well, if you'd done this, and like, trust me when I tell you, as a rape victim, and anybody listening to this that's a sexual assault or rape survivor will be like, nodding their heads when I say this. Anybody that has been a victim, especially of rape or sexual assault, knows they have replayed it in their head at least 10,000 times, trying to find the place where they could have stopped it, where they could have seen the red flags, where they could have said or done or been differently. What if I hadn't had that drink? What if I hadn't gone out that night? What if I had listened to my intuition? What if I had left when the rest of the girls left? What if I hadn't been on the dance floor? What if I? And listen, we have what if'd ourselves to the point of where that horse is not only dead, very, very, very painfully dead, it is ashes.
Yep.
So when you're in the space of going, what if I, and again, this is the place where I encourage people, if someone is doing something differently than you would do it, instead of bashing them, instead of judging, instead of shaming, instead of othering them, well, if you would just, may I ask what's prompting that decision? Tell me more about, I know it's none of my business, but tell me more about that. And I had someone say to me, I know it's none of my business, but may I ask why you're not wearing a mask? And I said, because I'm trauma impacted, and where I have a medical exemption, where if I put a mask on my face for more than like 5 minutes, I'm going to have a panic attack, an anxiety attack, and I'm probably going to be sitting here on the floor, and my body is going to literally freeze up on me. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I can't control, and you can't control how people act or react to you or respond to you, but I can control where I choose grace, and I choose to be in a space of, they don't know what they don't know. So I'm going to stand over here and do my thing. I'm going to stay as far away from people as possible. I'm going to just do what I need to do, go about my business and be done. I'm going to send people love and Reiki and be over here doing my own thing and let them be how they are in life. Because I can lead by example. I can be in a space of grace with people because that's what I choose for me, because that's what keeps me in alignment. And, one of the things I want to encourage anybody in your audience who is suffering and shame, anybody who's in a space of has not dealt with their trauma but knows that something is off and they need to, either reach out to rain.org, RAINN.org. They have excellent resources throughout the country. You can certainly reach out to me on Facebook. Jillie Maria Transformational Catalyst is my speaker page, or Fire and Ice Transformational Coaching. The reason I started my coaching business was because I wanted to help people be in the space of, I wanted to be a resource. And I wanted to help people be in the space of, we can teach you to feel your emotion, and not, in a space of all those people that are in a space of, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. I want that imprint to come off of you and have you be in a space of, if you're in your bedroom and nobody knows you're talking to me, breathe. Take a breath and allow yourself to feel that anger. Cry those tears. Get that out of your body, because when you allow yourself to feel those emotions, one, it brings you back into alignment eventually. And two, it brings you to a space of where you're magnetizing differently. Mm-hmm. So the beacon goes from a space of like this. If you imagine a window in a lighthouse and it's all gunky and gross and nasty, and you take some Windex and you scrape it off, and the light's already there, and all of a sudden the light is shining. When we become trauma survivors, and survivor thriver is 2 years out of your original incident. So either, like for me, it was 2 years out of, and it's give or take. So it's at least 2 years out when you go from the place of identifying as a victim to being a survivor thriver. And it just basically means that you're in a space where you've mostly healed. I'm a rape survivor. And being in a space of like, no, I'm actually moving into more of a thriver space where I'm like, you know what? Give it your best shot. If you have questions, ask me. Don't ever be afraid to ask me a question. If I don't have an answer, I'll get you one. If I'm in a space of like, hey, this is educating people, though, I feel like is really important. And being able to be in a space where, like not filtered. I like the notion of your podcast, because I really believe that the more we're able to be in a space of not filtering things, not being in a space of, I'm not interested in PC conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in like what people expect to hear, because the more that we keep talking about things from a space of like, we can't talk about that. Well, when are we going to talk about that? When were you planning to have that? Because we all have that, and I tell people, we all have an elephant under the rug in our dining room that's really, really big, and the table is now levitating because that elephant is so big that we're in a space of like, well, maybe I should stop and deal with that elephant. And realizing that, again, if you're in a space where you have stuff to deal with, you're not going to eat the elephant in one sitting, and you wouldn't want to, because it's going to create a crisis for you in your real life. So you're going to eat it with a knife and a fork, one little bite at a time, at your own pace. But I want to congratulate you for showing up for yourself. I want to congratulate you in advance for being courageous enough to say, I need help, to say something is not okay, and I need to, now do I need to heal, but I deserve to heal. Mm-hmm. I deserve to be at peace with my own self, and I deserve to listen to my demons so that I can hear them say, I'm going to keep pushing you down, and I'm going to keep making you afraid. No, I'm done with that. I'm not going to be in a space where I'm listening to someone else's narrative of my life and being in the space of, one of the things that someone had said to me probably been 3 or 4 years now, but I had published an article. And someone asked me, like, random questions. Bottom of the article was, what was the race of your rapist? And I said, he was Hispanic. It's fact. And they went, oh. And the person put on me, well, you must be afraid of all Hispanic men. And I just laughed. And I said, nope. And honestly, I'm not even afraid anymore of my rapist. If I don't ever see him again, it won't be a day too soon. But point of fact is I'm no longer in a space of, I don't know what to do, because the fact of the matter is I do. The fact of the matter is I know how to take care of myself. I've learned self-defense. I've learned how to be strong enough to fight back. I've learned all the red flags to be in a space of like, that's not just a pretty red flag, that's a peace out.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, that was the biggest why behind why I started the coaching. And also because I started as an intuitive coach and people were saying, you're really spot on with what you're saying. And you really should be coaching. Oh, well, okay. So sort of by accident, but also by intention, that I became a transformational catalyst and a coach is because I know, having worked with hundreds of clients, that when you start feeling the emotion, you allow yourself to let it come up and you dissolve it. The emotion is what holds our victim stories in place.
Yep.
And when we are holding on to anger, resentment, guilt, grief, shame, we're drinking poison, expecting someone else to die. And then we're adding resentment because we're really pissed off at the person we're mad at. Why isn't he, she, they reacting to me? Well, why aren't they dying? I'm over here hating on them and they're 1,000 miles away and I'm hating on them from here. Usually not how that works. But you can free yourself to be in a different space with your emotion. And when you're no longer in a space of reactivity and the person can't get a reaction out of you anymore, then they're like, and I've actually had this happen. What are you? What? So I thought you would fill in the blank with what my reaction was supposed to be. So what are you doing? Well, I've gone on a healing journey and I'm healing all this emotion. I'm letting all of it go. So I'm not holding on to anger and resentment because it's a really, really heavy burden to bear. And I 10 out of 10 don't recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did most of it without sharing it with anybody because it was my journey, because I didn't want to bleed on people that didn't cut me. But I want to say in closing that you are stronger than you think you are. You have it in you. Your survival record to this moment is 100%. It's just a matter of going back into the emotion. And I don't say just lightly, but again, when our survival record's 1,000%, we go in, we start feeling the emotion with telling nobody about it except our counselor. And, we start healing it. And it changes your life drastically.
Yep.
Because if you're putting out anger and resentment and sadness and guilt and grief and shame, you're calling that right back in. It's a boomerang.
That is awesome. Jillie Maria, it's been a pleasure talking to you and just listening to you. You have so much to give, and I'm going to reach out to you later on today, and definitely we're going to set up a part 2 because I think there's a lot more, and I do not want to hold you back. So we're going to be talking for sure.
Fantastic. It was great. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jillie Maria. Take care.
You do the same.